Hi, I'm Matt Eland. I'll be walking you through how to build a game and learn C Sharp. This is a self-guided workshop offered by Tech Elevator. I'm an instructor for Tech Elevator's Columbus campus, and I have a rich history in .NET and C Sharp development. I've actually been working with C Sharp since Beta 2 of the language back in 2001. Today, I want to walk you through learning C Sharp and really just how to build applications in C Sharp, .NET, and Visual Studio. So in order to work through this lesson, you're going to need either a PC or a Mac, and be able to download software from the internet. So we're going to start off by downloading a piece of software called Visual Studio. So I'm going to open up my browser, and I'm going to go to visualstudio.com, and that'll take me to a Microsoft page where we see the different versions of Visual Studio available. If I'm on a Mac, I'm going to click Download Visual Studio for Mac and follow those installation instructions. I'm on a PC today, so I'm going to be demoing things through that, so just know that if you're running on the Mac, your user interface is going to look a little bit different. Maybe your options look a little bit different as well. If you're on a PC, you're going to download Visual Studio, but it's going to let you choose which edition you want to download. As of the time of this recording, 2019 is the latest available version, and we're going to be downloading Community 2019. I already have Visual Studio installed on my machine, so I'm going to be skipping this step. However, I want to point out some options that you may see when you're installing. So you'll see a screen that looks something like this during your installation process, and it can be a little intimidating with a lot of different options available, but I want to highlight this desktop and mobile .NET desktop development workflow. You want to make sure that this is checked before you install Visual Studio, and this will let you make console applications in C# using .NET Core, which is what we're going to be doing in our series. So go ahead and pause the video and finish installing Visual Studio, and when you're done, rejoin me, and I'll walk you through creating our project, and we'll look at the code that it generates. Alright, so I'm going to assume that you have Visual Studio installed, so I'm going to open up Visual Studio on mine, and I encourage you to do the same. And your startup screen is going to look a little bit different than mine based on whatever projects you may have open, or maybe some initial start experience, but you should see a Create a New Project button somewhere on your start screen. So go ahead and click that, and then you should see a screen somewhat similar to what's about to show for me, which is going to ask us for what type of project that we're going to choose. So you're going to have a whole bunch of options on the left, possibly based on what you've recently done, and you'll have some drop downs to select project types. I'm going to make sure that the C# programming language is the one that we're looking at. There are a lot of different languages in .NET, C#, F#, Visual Basic, things like that. But we want to focus on C# because if you don't choose that, you're going to be very confused when you see the code and it looks radically different than mine, and the things I'm typing in don't work for you because you're trying a different language. So make sure you have C# selected, and then look for a console app .NET Core option. This is what we want. .NET Core is Microsoft's latest version of .NET. If you're running this, if you're watching this sometime in the future, this may be .NET 5 or .NET 6 or something along those lines. Microsoft tends to rebrand things every so often. But assuming you see what I see, find console app .NET Core, make sure it's C#, and we'll click Next. And then it's going to ask us for a name of our project. I'm going to type in Tech Elevator period, guess the number. Today we're going to be building a guess the number game where the computer asks you to guess numbers, and it'll tell you if the actual number is higher or lower, or if it's exactly correct. And once you get that correct number, the program will end. So this is going to be a 4-part series in which I walk you through the basics of C# development and programming in general, working with Visual Studio, and then adding these little features until we have kind of our finished guess the number game. Alright, so it doesn't really matter what location you have. The project name doesn't really matter either. It affects the code that Visual Studio generates, but that's about it. Don't touch solution name and leave this check box unchecked. And then when you're ready, just click Create. And Visual Studio will do some things behind the scenes, and it may take itself a little while, but after a while you'll see the fancy user interface with all sorts of options and hopefully some code right in the middle of it. So it looks like Visual Studio's finished generating my code and starting to open the user interface. So let's see what shows up once it fully loads. All right. So we see about 12 lines of code in this little program.cs window. And we're going to look through these lines line by line. So I want to start, I think, on this line number 3. We'll get back to line number 1 in a moment. We have this line that says namespace techelevator.guess the number. You may see something different than that. This is the name of the project that we typed in when it asked us the name of the project. We'll also see it over here in our sidebar on the Solution Explorer. It says techelevator.guess the number and solution techelevator.guess the number. If we typed in something else for a project name, we'd see it there instead. If you typed in something else, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. However, this is what I see. And this namespace, it just says, like, hey, we're going to be declaring some things in here. If anything else ever wants to reference them, this is kind of the folder that they're in. It's a loose analogy, but it's sort of a folder for finding bits of code that other things can import into their code. And looking at line number 1 now, that using system, well, system is a namespace, just like techelevator.guessTheNumber is. So someone else, Microsoft, wrote some code in a namespace called system, and we want to be able to use some of that code. So we say using system, and this imports that code into the file so that we can work with it. We actually use it down here on line 9. If we hover over this, we see class system.console. Don't worry about that too much right now, but that's what we're doing. We're importing system. So if I get rid of this, we see some red and red squigglies. And red squigglies are generally the way Visual Studio tells us that we did something wrong. So I'm going to hit undo, and we'll get back using system, and everything will be fine. Okay, line 4 and line 12 are both curly braces. An open curly brace and a closing curly brace. And curly brace is how we define a scope in C#. A scope is just like, hey, there's a bunch of stuff that's kind of related. So it's like starting a grouping of related things. Okay? Line 5. So inside of this techelevator guess the number scope, or whatever project name that you have, we have a class declaration. It says class program. I'm going to create a class named program. Class is... This is very introductory workshop, so we're not really going to talk a whole lot about what classes are, but just think about a class as something that takes a lot of kind of related functionality together and packages it very nicely, so that all the internals are, you know, kind of handled, and you can work with things. So we have a class here called console that we can work with, and that's for writing to the user interface and getting input from the user. We have a class we'll deal with later for random number generation. Our class here is just a program that runs. We have an entire week and a half of our 14-week curriculum devoted to classes and object-oriented programming at Tech Elevator. Most of what I'm showing you in this 4-entry series is adapted from our first week of that 14-week curriculum. So I can't really get too much into that. At line 6 and line 11, we have another scope. And so here we have this scope that shows us, like, hey, this is what's inside of our program, inside of our program class. On line 7, we have this kind of funky line, static void main string bracket args. And args is gray, and main has a blue underline. That's scary. That's fine. Don't worry too much about this, other than understand that this is declaring a method named main. When the program starts up, this console application starts up, .NET is going to call our main method, and anything inside of main is going to run. So anything inside of this scope here, defined on lines 8 through 10, is going to run. When the scope ends, when line 10 is reached, the method is going to complete, and the program is going to end. So the program is only active in this small little scope here. Everything else is just setting it up. And then finally, we get the only line of this 12-line program that actually does something, and that's the console writeline hello world line. This says, hey, I want you to find the console, which is the terminal. It's what the user is going to see when they're interacting with this from the command line. And I want you to write something out, like a complete line, and the thing I want you to write out is hello world. We'll talk a little bit more about the syntax in the next entry in this series. But for now, find the little green arrow with the name of your project on it on the toolbar and click it. And that's going to run our program. And you're going to see some stuff popped up on your screen potentially as the program is building. And then you should see this window pop up, and you'll see orange at the bottom over here. But if you look up over here, we see hello world. So hello world, yeah, that's what we told it to write out to the console. So this is the console that it wrote it out to, and that's what it did. So it wrote out hello world so that we could see it. So this is the anatomy of a very simple program, in fact, an auto-generated program. In the next entry in this series, we're going to start looking at a little bit more complex things that we can do in code. We're going to be rewriting our first pieces of code, talking about variables and expressions. So stay tuned, and I'll catch you in the next piece of the series.